Okay. All right. Good afternoon, late afternoon. Welcome to the event today in celebration of Italian Heritage Month. My name is Diana Famia. I am the president of the Greater Washington, D.C. region of the National Organization of Italian American Women. Tonight's speaker will be talking about Rome's liquid gold, extra virgin olive oil. Our speaker is a co-founder with her dad of an organization that they have, it's a company. She's the co-founder of Libellula, an olive oil company with a mission to provide the highest quality Italian extra virgin olive oil, with farmers as the protagonists and Italian culture as the backdrop. She will explain this to you. Julia Franchi Scarselli, our speaker, as well as the co-founder, is also the executive officer at Climate KIC, an Amsterdam-based organization that orchestrates systems innovation to mitigate climate change. She works closely with the CEO to support the organization's strategy. Julia is a graduate of Smith College, and she has degrees in environmental science and policy and architecture. She's been fascinated by the innovation inherited in natural systems. Julia is on a mission to build mutualism between human society and the natural world by building cultures of regeneration and resilience. This evening, our moderator will be Julia Bellotti, a member of our DC Council. She's been a member since her sophomore year at American University. Julia is a government contractor with Tesla Government Inc. So we have two Julias here today, our moderator and definitely our speaker, Julia Franchi Scarselli. Thank you. Julia, you want to take that over?
I'm assuming it's Julia Bellotti, right? Not me.
Yeah, Bellotti. She seems to be, oh, she's. Just unmute.
Can you hear me, Diana?
No, we couldn't hear you at all. We couldn't see you either.
Okay. Can you hear me now, though?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So I'll just be moderating today's discussion. So Julia will be doing a fantastic presentation for us, and we do encourage you to please put questions that you have for her in the chat box. We'll be answering plenty of time for all of those at the end. But to kick us off, we would love if you could put in the chat where you are dialing in from, as well as on a scale of 1 to 10, how familiar you think you are with olive oil. That will just help frame our discussion and make sure that we are off to a solid start. So if you could just put the chat there, then we will go ahead and I'll turn it over to Julia for our presentation.
All right.
And Adrienne from New York, Mount Pleasant, New York. Well, hopefully by the end of this presentation, you will be a little bit more familiar with how to pick olive oils, which is actually coming up because harvest season is just around the corner. Leslie's from DC. New Jersey. Oh, we have an Italian Patinto. Buonasera a tutti from Connecticut.
You should do your presentation.
Should I start? Okay.
Yes, definitely.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to see where people are from because that helps contextualize sort of, and not just who I'm speaking to, even though we're in a virtual room. So as Diana and Julia very generously introduced, I am Julia Franchi Scarselli. And maybe I'll start off with a little bit about my background and how I came to start Libellula. So my origins come from Milano. My mother used to call me a caffè latte because she was the milk and my dad was the caffè, the coffee. And so I am the perfect blend between the two of them. I was born and raised in Milan and then moved to the DC area. I actually moved to Arlington for high school. And had this sort of clash, the all-American high school experience compared to the all-Italian experience. And I've oftentimes felt a bit in limbo between these two worlds, feeling like an American in Italy and then like an Italian in the US, as I'm sure some of you might relate to as well. And when I went to university, I chose to go not too far from where my mother went in Western Massachusetts at Smith College, which is one of the Seven Sisters. And fortunately for me, I stumbled upon an entrepreneurship competition where I could unleash my love for building. And growing up in Milan, a lot of the influences around building things, I thought I wanted to be an architect, really impacted me. So I always was very much focused on architecture. And I realized that what I really loved in the architecture classes was coming up with the concepts that would do good, that would create good for people. So Libellula very much originates from the merging of these two worlds, from my trying to come to terms with it, merging Italy and the Italian side of me with the American side of me. And also this desire and yearning to build something that has meaning and is contextualized in both of these places. So when I was a sophomore in college, at the same time, my dad moved from Rome. My family's from Bologna, but he was working in Rome and chose to move to a tiny little medieval town just north of the city called Monte Libretti, which translates as to Hill of the Little Books. And it's very, very small, 6,000 people total. But what defines this area and the region, the Sabina region, is the plethora of olive trees. It's almost, you look out and it looks like a sea of olive trees. It just dominates the landscape. And speckled in the landscape, you also have a lot of fruit trees and you have different kinds of produce grown, because a lot of the people who live in the town then work in Campo dei Fiori, which is the market in Rome, and supply the city with all the produce. And it's an area that's not frequented very much by tourists, but also by Italians. So I was completely unaware that this region, the Sabina region, existed. And when I would visit my father in the summers in between college, I learned that a lot of the people who had inherited olive groves, most of the families own about 200 trees and they're being passed down over generations. They're starting to abandon the groves. And that's due to several factors, primarily because of the financial resources required to maintain them, because maintaining an olive tree is a year-long process and there is something different that is required throughout the year, whether you are in the winter or in the fall, as we are in now. And right now is harvest season, and harvest season is the most intensive because you actually have to get people on the ground, shake the trees, make sure that you press the olives within a day. And we can go into sort of the whole process of what it takes to create that final bottle of extra virgin olive oil that we all love and use in our kitchens. And the other side of things is another topic that is really near and dear to my heart, which is climate change and how climate change is impacting and changing the practice of olive oil cultivation, which, as you all know, goes back for centuries. And so there was a yearning in my heart, also in my father's heart, to come together and try to help these communities maintain this practice and keep being able to pass it down over generations as a practice that is really important to their cultural identity, but also the cultural identity of the region itself. And so I went back to Smith and I brought this kernel of an idea to our entrepreneurship competition. And at the end of that competition, I got a prize, got some prize money, and decided to go back to Italy and start the company, mainly by starting the website and registering it as an Italian agricultural association. And so that was 5 years ago now. And the past 5 years has seen a lot of progress, a lot of change. But mainly, we have decided to reinforce the sustainable mission behind what we do. And that it goes into the idea, the concept that I'm going to talk to you about now. But I'm going to start off and sort of describe first, what is libellula? So libellula means dragonfly in Italian. And the reason why we picked this name is because dragonflies are creatures that are almost indicators of air quality, in the sense that they're very sensitive to pollution. And when you see a dragonfly, it can oftentimes be a great indicator for the air quality, because when it's polluted, they don't do well in those environments. And in this region, there are a lot of dragonflies, which to us was also a symbol of, this is a region that not only has good air quality, but also it has good air quality because the processes that are used to cultivate all of the produce are probably organic and respecting the nature and the surrounding environment. And so we wanted to call Libellula for that reason. And then another thing that was really important to us was that we wanted to invite people into the process of the yearly process of cultivating olive oil, and not just give them a final product in the form of a bottle that is separated from the land. And so that is where the adoption model was born. We wanted people to be able to participate, even if they're not physically there with us, in what happens in the spring, what happens in the summer, and therefore create communication that brings them into this space and makes them feel like they're there experiencing it with us, and not just the land, but also the community. And Maurizio, or, our farmer, what is he up to? And Pepe, and, really get them involved. And so the adoption model serves as a way to make the people feel like they're also giving back to these families. So the idea is that you would adopt a grove. Right now we have 3 groves that we work with 3 different family farmers, and they all have different names. So Podere Giardinetto, Podere La Tenuta, and Podere La Cristina. And the scope of those groves is different. Every grove has a different goal. So Podere Giardinetto, for example, is really dedicated to planting new trees, because this is sort of a much more newly developed plot of land, and we want to populate it with more olive trees and continue the legacy that has sort of been growing over the centuries. We have another grove where we're focusing on transitioning it from previous agricultural practices, which are not always completely sustainable, to completely sustainable and regenerative practices that are in line with not just sort of, the traditions of reading, lunar phases to determine when it's the right time to pick the olives, but also making sure that there is no waste in the entire process throughout the year. And then in another grove, we're working to restore the olive trees, because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these trees have been abandoned for a few years. And olive trees are interesting in the sense that they're domesticated plants. So if they're not being maintained or taken care of, they stop producing the fruit. And then you can no longer use the fruit to make olive oil. And so it takes a few years to get it back up and running and producing the fruit that we love so much. And so we're working in that grove to bring it back to a space where it can produce that fruit. And so we separated these groves so that everybody can choose what goal they want to participate in and contribute to, and also make sure that we are held accountable, that the farmers are held accountable, and they feel like they have a community of people cheering them on and reading on the sort of along the journey of the process of what it takes to go from point A to point B. And so when you adopt a tree, you receive not just an adoption certificate, but this plethora of photos and this invitation in a post-COVID world, which is what we had started earlier, to really bring people to experience the land for themselves, to travel there, to see the groves in person, and to meet the people in person. So that's kind of the background, the heart of Libellula. As I mentioned, the social enterprise component is incredibly important for us. And in terms of the future endeavors, we're looking to scale up and expand, because right now we only have 3 groves, as I mentioned, but there are a lot more families in the region that would need to have some more support and to connect with like-minded farmers and share knowledge and share resources. And so in essence, my vision for Libellula would be to create a collective of these family farmers that on their own are too small or produce a quantity of olive oil that's too small to actually sell or bring to the market themselves. But as a collective, they can bring it to people who are looking for a direct, really high quality extra virgin olive oil that brings them connected directly to the source. I'm also now going to share a video to show you a bit about what I was talking about just now and bring you into the territory. So if you're watching on video, you will be able to see. If not, maybe you can imagine. We'll bring you into the imaginary space. And then the rest of the video, I'm not going to share with you because it is, I actually don't, there we go. It is videos of cats, because there are a lot of cats in the town of Monteribretti. So what you were seeing was the process from picking the olives all the way to bringing it to the mill, which needs to happen within 24 hours maximum, so that the olive is pressed when it's freshest and, most recently disconnected from the tree itself, the life source of its pure olive oil. And when you pick an olive at this stage, if you put your fingernail in it, you will see that it's already oozing olive oil. So that it's ready when it has that kind of consistency. So we produce 2 labels. One is the more traditional label, which in fact we call Classico. And that is the one that we've been producing for 4 years. And it is usually harvested mid to late October, depending on the weather and the climate of that year. But that is the kind of olive oil that you can use really with anything. And it works really well with salads and with fish. It's a little bit lighter, but it still has that pepperiness in the back of your throat, which you are used to when you experience extra virgin olive oils. But we last year introduced a new label, which is our Riserva, our reserve, which is a product of an olive that is harvested earlier in the year. So I would say mid-September to late September, again, depending on the weather. And that is a little bit stronger because at that point, the olive is still green. It hasn't turned black yet. And so that olive oil is fantastic on, minestrone and pasta and ragu and meats. It's more potent. And I love it because it's just stronger, and I really like the stronger flavor, and it's a little bit more peppery, and it's definitely for a stronger palate. But so now we have two labels, and the fun thing is that everybody has a different, palate, and it works differently for different people, and you can really experiment with these two olive oils. And what we're trying to do is show people that olive oil is like wine. These are sister products that emerged around the same time in the same place in the Mediterranean mostly. And like wine has many different varieties of grapes, and there are wine connoisseurs. There are also different varieties of olives, and soil and the variety of olive and climate and all of those factors, water, really impact and change how an olive oil tastes. And so I'm going to leave you with that, and maybe we'll move into Q&A.
Sure. So yeah, we've had a couple of questions come in. So someone asked, are your workers Italian, or are you dependent on migrant labor? And then kind of could you talk about, in the overall olive oil industry, how dependent are they on migrant labor? For example, tomatoes in Italy are harvested, in part by migrant labor. So could you touch upon that?
That is a really good question. And I unfortunately don't have as much knowledge on that particular component when it concerns the industry of olive oil. What I know is that the olive oil industry has been fraught in many ways. I don't know if any of you have read the New York Times article from 2015 on olive oil fraud, but I know that there is a lot of there are some issues on that side of things of olive oils being sold when they're actually not extra virgin olive oil and mislabeled. The kind of thing, maybe packaged in Italy, bottled in Italy, but not actually made in Italy. In terms of migrant labor in our particular business, we only have people who have, these three farmers are people who have lived in this town for a very long time. And again, they've inherited these trees, so they have very strong roots in this region. But we're hoping to employ migrant labor in the US side of things when we're actually doing the distribution, because we're distributing from Maine, close to my partner's home, because it's just not just because it's convenient because I have a person there, but also because of the temperature control. It's just easier to have a distribution center when it comes to a fresh product like extra virgin olive oil to be not in a distributed in a hot environment, because it can damage the product. And there we're employing migrant workers, but not on the production side of things.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you. So yeah, and as people, you can either put your questions in the chat or the Q&A. I'll filter through all of them just as they come in. So next question is kind of touches on that fraud issue. How can you ensure that your olive oil is pure and not diluted with non-olive oil?
So there are different ways of doing that. Obviously, being there and monitoring the process is one very initial easy way to do it. But what we also use is we do tests of the olive oil after the olive oil has been pressed. And so whenever you're selling extra virgin olive oil, you also want to let people know what is the polyphenol content, for example, which is one of the major things that people look for when they buy extra virgin olive oil, because polyphenols are really good for the heart, for cardiovascular health, but for many other health concerns as well. And a good extra virgin olive oil has higher polyphenol content, for example. And so we have somebody who comes in, tests our olive oil, gives us that data. And so every year we have that data for our 2 labels and can share that with the people that purchase our olive oil. And another way to just make sure that it's high quality is, again, making sure that, in the immediate sort of when you're doing the harvest, the olive is picked from the tree and then not just put in a bag, because it can get compressed and it can damage the olives. They can get bruised in transit to the mill, but that they're put in a box so that they can breathe. And then the box and the boxes then are stacked on top of each other. They're brought to the mill, which shouldn't be too far, and not just because of carbon footprint, but because, again, you really want to make sure that those the time frame between the picking and the milling is not too long. You bring it to the harvest and the mill, and the mill needs to be really clean. So you need to make sure that the mill has done all that it can do to sterilize and to clean, to run water across its entire system, so that by the time that you put your batch of olives, you know that the olive oil that's going to come out is going to be completely pure and not contaminated with the previous batch of olives, which you don't know, how long ago have they been picked. So there are a lot of factors that you need, that we monitor, that we need to control for. And so then when you sort of the process of actually selecting the mill is also important, because mills have very different standards. And so in our area, we have a lot of public mills, which is great, because that means that anybody who owns olive trees, or, who wants to harvest and press their olives, can do that easily. And so we needed to sort of find our way to the mill that we wanted to work with that would meet our standards.
That's very cool. We have a very quick question here. Where in Abruzzo is the grove?
So actually, we're close to Abruzzo, but we are in the Lazio region, so just north of Rome. So Abruzzo, I would say it's a couple hours from Abruzzo, but we're a little bit southwest in respect to Abruzzo, just south of Orvieto, actually. Around Rieti area. So 40 minutes north of Rome, maybe 40 minutes south of Rieti, kind of in between, in that space, in that countryside region in between those 2 cities.
Awesome. Our next question is from Alfonsina. How do you import olive oil into the US, and what's the cheapest way?
That is the billion-dollar question. And if anybody finds a cheaper way, please let me know. So that has actually been, you sort of pointed out the hardest thing for us, which has been to actually, how do you get the physical product from Italy to the US? And we've tried different ways. But what we've landed upon is working with an importer that has also a headquarter in Italy and actually located in Abruzzo. And then we bring, a batch every 2 months to our distribution center in Maine, which is small, because again, we're still operating at very small scales. And then from there, we use UPS to sort of transport across the country, because we wanted to also minimize transportation times. We started off when we had just opened business, shipping, single orders from Italy to the US, because we didn't know or didn't have a center in the US yet. And that, as you can imagine, was really expensive and also not great for carbon emissions. And it took a while. So we've landed on a solution that works for the interim, but eventually we want to find a distribution center that can expand, because we would love to keep growing.
Yeah, that's great. And as a follow-up to that, do you bottle here or in Italy?
Everything is bottled in Italy. So we bottle actually based on demand. We don't bottle everything once a year. We keep our olive oil stored in these big canisters, which again is temperature control, quality control. And then we'll slowly start bottling, based on how many orders come through. So the bottles are, basically bottled whenever you make the order.
That's awesome. So we've got a question from Mary Rose. Would you please explain the difference between olive oil labeled as organic olive oil, extra virgin, or clear olive oil? And how do we navigate all those labels?
So extra virgin olive oil, I know for a fact, I know more about extra virgin olive oil than I know about virgin olive oil, because I know there are many different titles. My sort of suggestion would be don't buy olive oil if it's not extra virgin olive oil, because there are quality controls on extra virgin olive oil. There are no quality controls on any other kind of olive oil. An olive oil could be an olive oil blended with sesame seed oil, for example. And so it's really important to read the ingredients to see sort of what is included in those olive oils. Where was it bottled? Is there a harvest date? Harvest dates are really important to look for, because sometimes an olive oil can also be labeled extra virgin, but it won't actually tell you when it's been harvested. So it might be extra virgin from 3 years ago. And an extra virgin olive oil from 3 years ago is at that point maybe even rancid. Extra virgin olive oil is a fresh product, and so you want to consume it within a year and a half of the actual harvest date. So I don't know if I actually answered directly your question, but I would suggest, if you can, to always go for extra virgin olive oil, because it just always tastes better anyway.
Great recommendation. Our next question is from Kathleen. Is the mafia still involved in the olive industry?
I can't say yes or no to that question, but what I can say is read that New York Times article, because they did an amazing job. And, I think they're working hard. Italy, the industry is working hard to remove that influence from itself. But I think it's hard in the sense that it's easy to, in this day and age, mafia, really what it is you're importing olive oil from another country, another neighboring country, and then calling it Italian, and then maybe even calling it extra virgin olive oil, but again, adding maybe green color to the olive oil to make it look greener than it is, and then blending sesame seed oil to cut the costs. So I would say yes, that act is still happening. And I think what happened in the wine industry, a few, decades ago, where a lot of people got sick because there weren't enough quality controls around wine, that mobilized people to do something about it. And I think that we're starting to get to that point where people are becoming more aware of the differences between extra virgin olive oil. Okay, this doesn't taste like it should. But I think it's really up to people to sort of become more aware and start making different decisions, because there is still a lot of that fraud happening, unfortunately.
Wow. And so for the bottles that are just labeled as organic olive oil, like does that just mean anything? Is that likely a blend maybe, or?
Yeah, I think organic olive oil is interesting because, it probably means that the practice of whatever went into the olive oil was or followed organic agricultural practices. But it still does not mean that it's extra virgin, because extra virgin has to, again, be made from a really, freshly picked olive. That's one of the main components of extra virgin olive oil. Another really important factor is that it's been cold pressed or cold extracted. And so no heat has been added to it. So even if an olive oil is organic, and it was produced in an organic manner, if it wasn't in the mill, pressed or extracted cold, then that already damages some of the properties that are really good for your health and that taste good too, just in the process of milling and pressing the olive.
Gotcha. So kind of another follow-up. This is a great discussion, everyone. Is there any truth to the idea that you can tell if it is EVO by putting it in the refrigerator and seeing if it becomes solid?
That is so interesting. I have never heard of that before. I actually don't know. Has anyone here done that? No. Yeah, I have never heard that before. So that is news to me, but I'm definitely going to try because I have a whole lot of bottles here. So I will follow up with an answer to that question.
Okay, great. And then I have several questions of people of where can they find their products, your products in New York, in the DC area. Is there a link? I'm going to take this opportunity to paste both an email and a website in the chat box there, so you have that. But I'll leave it to you to answer any sort of specific area distribution questions.
So we sell primarily online, again, because we wanted to really facilitate the direct link between the people who purchase the olive oil and the people who produce the olive oil. And so the link that Julia Bellotti just posted includes our website. It's libellula.com. And there you'll be able to sort of read a little bit more about the story, read a little bit about my co-founder, who's my father, Julia Franchi Scarselli, similar name. And our sustainability goals. So that might help you go into more depth, sort of based on the high level themes that I touched upon here. And then in terms of being able to buy it physically, we did sell it at the Italian store, which I was really happy about, given that I moved to Arlington and the Italian store was a big destination for us. And I think that we're going to be able to add some bottles to their shelves in the next month. But the easiest way would probably be to just sort of look at the website.
Great, thank you. Do you guys have tastings? We got a question from Maria here. Do you offer tasting?
Yes. So we are planning an olive oil tasting in about a month. We have tiny little 50 milliliter bottles, which are, this big. And we're going to send them to everybody's house. So if people want to sign up, you can send me an email, which is also posted in the chat that Julia just posted. And I can include you in the invite list. But the idea is we're going to send you a box with these 2 labels, and you're going to receive them at your house. And then we're going to ask you to please wait to taste them, or you can have a taste in sort of leading up to the event if you really can't resist. And then mid-November, we're going to send you a meeting invite, so where you can participate in an online virtual olive oil tasting with your olive oils. And we'll invite a professional olive oil taster who also lives in the region, but who's British. So he has an interesting perspective on the olive oil industry. He moved there and just works as a professional olive oil taster. So he's very much passionate about the subject as well. And he'll guide us through a professional olive oil tasting. And in every box, we wanted to include a brochure where you can actually sort of score the olive oil yourself. And I would be really curious to hear what sort of flavors and notes you pick up on, because there's a whole world of olive oil tasting out there. So if you're interested, definitely do send me an email and we'll send you more information.
That's awesome. I wish I were a professional olive oil taster. That seems like the best.
Great life.
All right, another question here. Are the mills, Francois, in your town modern ones, or are they still the old way to press the olives?
They're the modern ones now. So actually a fun fact, a lot of the bottles that are sold in the US still read cold pressed. And that is just, people are more familiar with that term. So brands still use cold press, but actually now the modern way of pressing olives is to extract, to cold extract. because we definitely don't have the animals that can help move around the old stones and crunch the olives to a pulp in the same way that happened a few centuries ago. So we have the modern system, which is very efficient, very clean, and produces just a top-notch olive oil. And over the years, it's interesting to blend sort of the tradition and really respecting the tradition with also the innovation, which is working with the environment, trying to be more sustainable, trying to produce a higher quality product. And so we're constantly balancing, wanting to be innovative, but also wanting to stay true to our roots and the tradition of olive oil cultivation, because it goes way back.
No, definitely. And Alphacina, who asked that question, commented that her dad says that the modern one is better. So
Yes.
Have you considered making EVO infused with oranges or lemons, or infused with anything else, maybe?
We have. I think that we haven't. I mean, that is absolutely something that we might explore. Right now, we've been focusing on just perfecting our staple labels and wanting to produce an olive oil that is just top notch without going into the other sort of adding something more to it. But that is definitely something that we're thinking, because I know that a lot of people love olive oils that have something infused in it. I also remember tasting once an olive oil that's been infused in truffle oil with truffles. So like a truffle oil with extra virgin olive oil, which was very interesting, but it's a completely different experience. So that's kind of, yeah, that is something to think about, something that we would definitely explore maybe in the next few years.
Well, we look forward to that, for that maybe. Well, another question here, is the first extraction considered the best with press labels? Mary Rose notes that she's seen that those are the first press.
The first press, sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so is the first extraction considered the best? And then she's saying with pressed labels, I've seen that those are first press.
I wonder, I don't actually know if it's, so there shouldn't be any difference in quality depending on the first, second, third, or fourth press. I wonder if what they're referring to is if it's an early harvest or if it's a late harvest. So the early harvest is what I was talking about earlier, which is our reserve label, which is a first press of the year. So it's when the olive is still green and it's not mature yet, and it's just a much stronger flavor. And some people do consider it to be better or elevated. It's sort of the crème de la crème of olive oils in the way that it's just super, super rich and fresh. And in Italian, it's called an olio novello, which in fact means that it's sort of a new olive oil. So it's the new olive oil of the year. And I wonder if that is what first press is referring to, but we've never used first press, so I actually wouldn't know if it's, if that's exactly it, but there shouldn't be a difference depending on whether it's the first, second, or third press if the olives are the same quality.
Cool. So I'm actually going to ask a question of my own here, because I've enjoyed listening to this. How has climate change impacted the olive oil industry? Has it impacted? Does that change when you harvest? I don't know, rain and everything else. You know, I know that's a big factor in the whole process. So how has that impacted you all?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, because we're dealing with it right now. So, I mean, the first thing that we see happen is the harvest date changes drastically. So last year, the harvest was supposed to happen mid-October. It ended up being delayed to almost early December because of how different the weather was. And so how much longer it took for winter to come around, and how much longer then it took for the olive tree to, sort of produce the fruit that would then be ready to be pressed. Another way that we've seen this happen is just by the tree being more damaged than previously. So there's a lot of intense weather that will damage the branches. Sometimes in the spring, when the olive, or when the flower is just starting to bloom, and then there's a very strong hurricane or storm, and the flower then falls to the ground, that's it. There are no more olives. So, we've seen interesting fluctuation. So every year, it's sort of it's a game of luck, really, how many olives you will have. And it usually so far has been a trend in that every other year has been good, in the sense that we've had a lot of olives one year and then not that many olives at all the next. And that's just the reality of working with nature. You just can't really plan for that. You can do as much as you can, and we put in some mitigants in place. And, there is also the issue of the xylella, which is a fly that will infect the fruit. And that fruit is no longer usable to produce extra virgin olive oil. It's been damaged. And then it also infects the tree, and the tree will be, unfortunately, forever damaged. And so the xylella hasn't reached our region yet, but it has reached Puglia quite significantly. So if you've ever gone to Puglia, or if you go to Puglia, which is the region on the heel of the boot, you will see miles of olive trees. They almost look like they've been hit by lightning, but they have actually been hit by the xylella fly, and they've had to burn them down to prevent them from spreading northward, because they're just the bane to the olive grower's existence. And I met an olive grower in Puglia this summer who was just, praying that the xylella wouldn't reach him, and he was just a few kilometers north of the area that got hit really badly. And the xylella is moving north because of warmer weather, because it's attracted to warmer climates, and because of sort of these changing patterns in weather is affecting the ecosystem in a very imbalanced way.
Cool, thank you. We've got a question from Carol. When will the 2021 harvest be available for purchase?
The 2021, so the harvest is going to happen in the next few weeks, the early harvest, and the last harvest is going to happen based on this, what we're anticipating, the end of November. So the Olio Nuovo is going to be ready by December, and we'll have sort of a celebratory announcement for people to taste the freshly pressed olive oil leading up to the holiday season.
That's wonderful. So we have kind of 10 minutes left before the top of the hour. So if there are any kind of last minute questions, feel free to put them in either the chat or the Q&A. We've got a couple of comments from Alfonsina in the chat here. She says, grazie, è tutto molto interessante, soprattutto per una principiante come me. And then she added, usually there's a good year and then a year with less olives. As you were just saying, her dad says that this has been it's been like that since the beginning of when olives have been produced. So
interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah.
All right. I'm not seeing any more questions on my view. Julia, do you have any wrap-up words or a comment overall that you want to make sure we take away with us?
A comment overall, I guess, buy extra virgin olive oil. No doubt that's the most important factor to look for, and look for a harvest date. And if you can, participate in a harvest, because it's just a magical experience. And there is something so beautiful of an olive tree and its silvery leaves and its just surrounding landscape. And after, when people can travel more easily, you are all most welcome to come visit us in our groves. And, again, the email is in the chat. So if you have any more questions or follow-up questions, please do send them my way. I'd be happy to answer them. And if you are passing by Rome and you want to come visit us in Monte Libretti, please also let me know, and my dad and I will be more than happy to welcome you.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And we do have several comments of thanks here. And I've got 2 last-minute questions that snuck in. We'll see if we can answer them quickly. 1, do the wild boar eat the olives? And 2, how long does olive oil last?
We don't actually have wild boar in our sort of little area. And luckily enough, I think the trees are just high enough for the boar to not reach them. So that's something that olive trees don't have to be concerned about. And then what was the other question?
How long does olive oil last?
So I would say it's good to consume olive oil within 1.5 years of the harvest date. So after that, it's not terrible, but it's just going to have the best properties if you do use it within 1.5 years of the harvest date.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you so much, Julia, for this presentation today. If anyone has additional questions for her, again, the email is in the chat there, info@libellula.com. If you're interested in, participating, visiting, checking it out, please send Julia a note there. But thank you so much for this presentation today. I know I learned a ton about olive oil that I did not know before. So this was really, really awesome. I've enjoyed eating it for years, but haven't explored it too much. So thank you so much. This webinar was recorded for everyone's tracking, but I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of their Thursday evening. And we especially appreciate you, Julia, for coming to us live from Italy. I know it's almost midnight for you. We really appreciate you staying up late for us. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Diana, for organizing this, for pulling this together.